So for everybody, I'm Andrea Guthrie. I'm the chair of Pando Labs, for those of you who don't know me. Thanks for joining us today for our November virtual event, which is around remote work, a guide to maintaining a productive and secure remote workplace with Earle Foote, the CEO of Nexus IT Consultants. Allow me to take just a minute to introduce Earle. Earle is a cybersecurity expert who started Nexus IT Consultants about 22 years ago, I believe, Earle, and serves as its CEO. He's a board member of the Salt Lake Chamber, and he's been active, very active this year, in fact, in leading the Summit Commerce COVID Collective to help reboot our local Summit County economy and help businesses recover from the impacts of COVID-related effects. He's a founding member of Pando Labs, and with his company, Nexus IT Consultants, is also a community partner of Pando. So thank you, Earle, for that. Nexus IT, for those of you not familiar, delivers cutting-edge IT technology services and products to clients throughout the state. They specialize in cloud solutions, compliance, and cybersecurity. They offer a full range of managed services that are suited to all different sizes of organizations and businesses. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Earle, and thanks for being here today with us, Earle, and giving us your time and helping us with this important topic.
Thank you very much for the gracious introduction, Andrea, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you. First of all, I just want to say I'm super grateful to be here today with all of you wonderful people and fellow Pando Labs members. I have genuinely missed interacting with with each of you in person throughout the pandemic. It's been having that monthly meeting was always a definite highlight of my month, and I want to recognize the hard work that our good friend David Bieber put into the organization to really begin to build a very vibrant collaborative community. It's been one of the things that I've missed most during this pandemic, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to at least be here virtually with each other today. If I'm going to be honest, I'm a little nervous. There's a lot of really brilliant people, here that I respect a lot. People that I think are far better at these types of situations than I am. Many of you may not know me. You may not know me that well, or you may not know that I'm actually quite an introvert, and I have to force myself to be a bit extroverted. And I certainly don't consider myself a public speaker, but we're going to give this a go today. And if you can help me through the process, if you would like to. I would like this to kind of be a bit of an open dialogue today. Feel free to ask questions either verbally or to throw those in the chat. I will do my best to keep an eye on those as we are going, and try to answer any questions that you might have as we get going here today. So Andrea, by the way, it looks like there's a few people that keep popping into the waiting room, and I'm admitting them. I don't know if you have that ability now or if you turned it all over to me, but I guess just so many amazing, wonderful friends here today. Thank you for being here. I want to talk a little bit about some of the topics that have been top of mind for our organization, our clientele, and for businesses in general throughout this pandemic, and that is remote workforces, how you keep them productive, how you keep them secure, how you keep a functioning, vibrant culture and dynamic with your team, and certainly share some things that we've found throughout the process. I guess to maybe lay the groundwork a little bit. Remote work, when the pandemic hit, was kind of a new concept for a lot of people and a lot of businesses, and for a lot it wasn't. In fact, for Nexus IT, for literally about 20 years, we have been enabling remote workforces. We've been helping our clients figure out the intricacies and dynamics of having people who telecommute and how you give them access, collaborative access to all of your tools and your data, and how you do that in a secure manner. And so the reality is this was very, a very natural transition for us. In the first few months of the pandemic, it kept us very busy helping a lot of organizations figure out this transition. A lot of organizations that weren't geared for it and had to immediately send people home and begin to ask them to work from home. And so I think we've gained some valuable knowledge, but the reality is knowledge and skills that we had even before the pandemic in this right. And so let's see if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. Quickly, I just want to preface maybe some of the scenarios that may be playing out for many of you, for your teams, and the scenarios we might be looking at post-pandemic, whenever that post-pandemic comes. I'm crossing my fingers that that's sooner than later. I'm hoping that that's going to be the case. And I hope, I think that many of you probably are as well. Out of 317 CFOs that were surveyed by Gartner, 74% of them said that they expect to continue to have remote workforce even post COVID-19. And they expressed that there were kind of three potential scenarios under which their teams might work going forward. And those are either to have the entire staff return to the office, to have a partial remote, partial in-office workforce, or to have the entire workforce continue to work via remote. I know that this latter option, option number 3, seems to be gaining some traction. At the same time, it seems to also have its own caveats and concerns, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue to go throughout the presentation today. So, what I want to establish perhaps what a use case scenario might be for, or a business case scenario might be for a business who is thinking about continuing to work remotely even after the pandemic. And I realize that many businesses are already either completely back in the office or doing a hybrid model like we are, or there are businesses that are 100% remote at this point and plan to remain that way. Excuse me. So a recent study showed that 77% of remote employees feel like they're more productive when they work from home. 76% prefer to avoid their office completely when they need to concentrate on an important project. And 98% of remote workers want to continue to work remotely, at least at times for the rest of their career. And I realize actually some of this data is a few months old, and some of this sentiment has evolved and changed a little bit as well throughout this process. It seems that all of us became a little. We were struggling to adapt to these new remote work models and having a lack of social interaction with our teammates, not having the proverbial water cooler conversations, and spending quality time with our teammates in the office. And then fall hits and kids go back to school, and we start seeing numbers spike again, and people get scared again, and everybody wants to switch back to 100% remote model. So we've had these ebbs and flows kind of in the sentiment that revolves around, of course, the situation and the work model that the situation has created. But these are some important things to keep in mind, that remote work is likely to have a place in most of our organizations moving forward to some degree. So what we saw happen at the beginning of this pandemic is that most organizations, even if they had a remote work model, it wasn't a model that was meant for the entire organization. Let's say it's an organization with 2,000 employees. Maybe they had 150 of those employees who were previously configured to work via remote. That might be because of different scenarios or situations. Generally, leadership teams, executive teams, sales teams, were already configured to work via remote, but much of the team was not. Or we saw businesses and organizations that had zero remote work models within their business, and we saw this mass scramble at the beginning. Mid-March there, when we kind of began a lockdown in our country and our state, and we saw a mass scramble of organizations trying to send people home, get people connected, have them start to work. And honestly, some of you may have experienced this situation, some of you perhaps did not, but there were businesses that really had no idea what to do. They had conventional models of client server databases and had file servers at their office premise, and they really weren't sure what to do and how to get people connected and collaborating and working day in and day out. And so we saw this priority right up front to just simply get people access. And in many cases, no security measures were taken whatsoever. And in some cases, just basic security measures were taken. So here's my recommendation to you right now. And I realize that we are, many months into this scenario now, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that there are significant amounts of businesses out there right now that still have not nailed this model, that honestly are operating in a very hodgepodge mode since March. And I know that because we get called in many times per week to do risk analysis or gap assessments for these businesses. We look at how they're operating their IT at the moment. We look at their compliance requirements and their current security measures. And I can tell you that the vast majority of companies that we are collaborating with, new companies that are asking us to interact with them and their IT, the vast majority of them have significant gaps right now. And so the reality is, pandemic or not, however we decide we're going to continue to work, that we probably are going to have to work in some measure of remote model, at least for another 9 to 12 to 18 months until there's a vaccination and we can begin to do max vaccinations with the population that is willing to do that. And so the reality is the time is now to figure out a solid IT plan and a plan that enables your workforce to be collaborative, that enables them to be productive, that implements accountability and measures performance, and most certainly a plan that takes into account security and compliance regulations that your business might be subject to. Just reiterating that when this all started out, just maintaining business continuity was really the most important measure that was happening with businesses. But it would be my recommendation that now, if you have not taken the consideration and have not really sat down with your leadership teams or your team in general to figure out your cybersecurity plan and to document that and to roll it out within the organization, most definitely now is the time. We've actually seen a recent statistic that 36% of organizations have suffered some measure of security incident due to remote workforces. For those of you that are more familiar with technology, with IT, particularly with infrastructure and the security side, you do and will know that distributing a workforce in disparate places, whether those be makeshift offices or homes, over disparate internet connections, using different routers and firewalls, and oftentimes utilizing the model of BYOD in our industry, just bring your own device. In other words, utilizing laptops or tablets or smartphones that belong to your team members. Your attack surface and your vulnerabilities increase exponentially in these models, and so it's extremely common that organizations that have distributed remote workforces are suffering security incidents, whether those be infections or actual breaches, as a result of these distributed remote environments. And so it's something we have to keep in mind. And I'll tell you this, we know as a matter of fact that cyber criminals and attackers are utilizing these new scenarios to launch new attacks, to innovate, and to prey upon more vulnerable businesses that now have a much more exposed attack surface. So 3 priorities that I want to suggest for your remote work models is to begin to enhance your existing security measures, provide your team with the right tools that they need to work permanently via remote. I talked about this scenario where you have all of these people working at home, potentially with a router slash quasi firewall that is provided by their internet service provider. Maybe they have a Comcast cable connection at their house. Maybe in Park City, many people use a wireless microwave internet connection, or you might have a CenturyLink connection. In good places you might have Google Fiber or some utopian fiber connection or something like that. But in most scenarios, most people at home are using the gateway modem router firewall device that their internet service provider has provided for them, or one that they have picked up at a big box store. That frankly, these devices are not meant to be commercial grade or business grade devices, and their security features and mechanisms are very limited, and honestly are not what we would recommend as best practices for businesses. And so one of the things that we suggest to our clientele or to prospects that are engaging with us is consider providing even basic business grade firewalls, routers to your team members if they're working from home. In many scenarios, if you are doing away with office spaces and doing away with those types of expenses, having these additional IT expenses, are simply offset with those expenses that you are taking off of your books. And so this is one thing that can definitely help your organization. Most certainly consider using corporate issued devices, corporate issued laptops or desktops or tablets. The reason you want to do that is because you can assign administrative control to those devices. When you're allowing a team member to use their own device, you are exponentially increasing your potential vulnerabilities, because that person is able to they have full rights and access to that computer that is theirs by all right, of course, but their own activity outside of your business activities can potentially expose your business data and your organization. Let's just say that they go get an infection through opening up an attachment in an email or through browsing on the internet to some site that is either compromised and downloads a piece of malware, or maybe they're browsing things that tend to be vulnerable to those types of scenarios, and that personal device gets infected, and that infection comes with a payload of a worm, which then once they connect to your corporate infrastructure, your corporate data, it will begin to look for network paths and begin to infect the rest of the computers that are connected, or if it's a ransomware, to encrypt your data. And so having administrative control over those access devices is very important. At minimum, we recommend utilizing what is known as mobile device management. Mobile device management will allow you to place some administrative controls that protect your business and your data. And so if they are going to use, if they are going to do the BYOD model, at minimum, you want to consider mobile device management. Endpoint security, by the way, let me see if I can, let me pause for 1 second and just see if I can find the chat. As I began presenting here, the chat went away for me. Andrea, we don't have any questions as of yet, do we?
Nope, not yet. I'll monitor them though, Earle.
Okay, very good. So pull that out of the way here. I wanted to talk quickly about endpoint security as well. This is what traditionally the marketplace knows as antivirus. Over the past decade, really, it has evolved to be what we refer to in the industry as endpoint security, or next-gen endpoint security. Effective endpoint security or antivirus now uses behavioral analytics, it uses machine learning, it uses AI, and it's evolved significantly even in just the past 24, 36 months. And so at minimum, having endpoint, a good, effective corporate grade endpoint security on your user devices when they are connected by remote is very important. You want to make sure that you have very effective backups in place that are being validated. We've seen a lot of businesses now who honestly haven't really thought about how are we going to have a corporate repository of files at this point, and how do we back up that data? By the way, if you're just using like Google Drive or Dropbox or Box or some other similar scenario, first of all, you want to make sure that at minimum you are paying for the business version of that product, and not using the free commercial version of the product. There's a lot of reasons for that, support, reliability being one of them, but backups being another. And even at that, most of those scenarios at many tiers of their business subscriptions do not include a verified backup for you. And so even if you are using some cloud repository as your file share, you need to be thinking about how you're backing that data up. But what I wanted to, coming back around to my initial thought, was we've seen a lot of organizations now who honestly haven't had much forethought into how do we share files securely, and how do we give access to all of our team members to those files, and how do we make sure they're backed up. And so what's happening, particularly in these bring your own device environments, is that team members are storing important pivotal corporate data to their local devices, to their local laptop, to their own personal laptop, and it's not getting backed up. And so what happens when that team member finds another job and they move on, or unfortunately you may have to fire them, or what if they become disgruntled and suddenly they have all of this data of yours, and you may be missing data that's important to you and your organization, that is then a problem to retrieve that data from that person who has left, particularly if their transition out was not necessarily a friendly one. And so I would encourage business leaders to be thinking about how do we have a central repository of data that we are all accessing that we are assigning the appropriate permissions, and and as such, that we are making sure that that data is backed up. Many organizations are starting to think about cloud virtual desktops. This is a really popular scenario, particularly if you have a bring your own device environment, because then you can provide a corporate controlled desktop that is sitting in a cloud that gives your team member access to all of the things that they need, whatever those applications might be, or to the files, to the collaboration tools, your CRM, whatever it may be that your team is working with. Do so in a secure environment that is locked down, so they only have access to what they absolutely need, and also in an environment that is redundant and being backed up. And so that's something we can expound upon more. There are a couple of questions in the chat here. Let's see. Pete Denninger says, Earle, thanks for doing this, and it's my pleasure, Pete. Are you seeing more targeted hacking of individuals as a way to penetrate corporations now that everyone is working from home? Yes, Pete, that is absolutely the scenario. Hackers are 100% aware of the current increased vulnerabilities that businesses are facing because of these distributed workforces. And by all means, they're coming up with, they're innovating. Like, I'll tell you this, hackers do not rest on their laurels. Cyber criminals do not rest on their laurels. And as businesses and business leaders, we cannot rest on our laurels, or we will most definitely leave ourselves exposed. And so they're doing new types of social engineering campaigns and phishing campaigns, and those might come through email or through web browsing, or through various different means, even SMS and text and phone calls, and all sorts of different scenarios where we're seeing a significant increase in cyber criminals and bad actors who are exploiting the current new vulnerabilities that this distributed workforce situation creates. Kevin Mayer says, can you comment on the suitability of OneDrive provided with Microsoft Business 365? Kevin, I'm actually going to come around to that in a few slides, so we're going to come back around to that. Pete Djokovic says, we're fortunate to have Earle as a local resource, and I appreciate that, my friend Pete. I hope everything's well, buddy. So anyways, just coming back to the slide here, I encourage everybody to begin thinking about implementing more permanent, more secure file sharing and collaboration tools for your teams. Some of the must-haves that you need to be thinking about for cybersecurity and compliance reasons. Let's see where we're at on time. We're about halfway through this, so I want to make sure that we get through this, in a timely manner. And so I'm gonna go through some of this stuff a little quicker. Anyways, some of the things you need to be thinking about, particularly for these remote workforce scenarios, is two-factor authentication. If you're not familiar with that, I think most of you are, and I realize this is a very savvy, smart group of people on this call, but essentially 2FA or two-factor authentication, dual authentication, multi-factor authentication, it goes by various different names. It's the process of having multiple mechanisms to authenticate to accounts. So think of your bank account when you go to to their website or their app, and you put in your username and password, and then they send you a text with a code, and you have to enter that code to get access. That is 2FA. And for most resources that businesses now use, whether those be a CRM or a proprietary line of business application or file sharing resources or Office 365, email, G Suite, whatever it might be, you can and should enable two-factor authentication now for everything across the board. And if you have any questions about how to do that, by all means, reach out. We're here to help. Conditional access is actually a very important thing to keep in mind here, particularly for these distributed workforce environments. Having a suite of tools that can inspect, particularly in bring your own device environments, and inspect the current situation of the device that is trying to access your corporate infrastructure or data, and then saying, okay, you meet these conditions, and therefore we're going to grant you access, or you don't meet these conditions. And those conditions can be things like, do you have the corporate endpoint security or the corporate antivirus? Is that up to date? Has it reported any potential concerns? Are you accessing your data over a VPN? And so there's all these potential conditions that can be inspected before team members actually are able to authenticate and begin to access your data. Conditional access is becoming something very popular, and something we definitely recommend checking out. Data loss prevention, DLP, is also an important technology to keep in mind. Another way, particularly in distributed workforce environments, to protect the accidental loss or potential malicious loss of data from rogue employees. And so DLP is something you want to keep in mind and consider in your ongoing IT and cybersecurity plans. Hard drive encryption, hard drive encryption is of paramount importance going forward, particularly because most of us these days are using mobile devices, and those mobile devices at times tend to get lost or stolen. I can't tell you the amount of scenarios we see in a year when a client or a potential prospect calls us up and says, hey, we had a really important laptop that was lost or stolen at the airport. We're not sure, if it was left behind or if it was taken on purpose. But that laptop has, very important access into our data, and it has very important data stored on it. And so you have these scenarios where, and honestly, there are bad actors who hang out at coffee shops, who hang out in airports, who hang out, in places where they know that they can grab mobile devices, and then they can use those mobile devices to access data that might have value to them, whether that data has value so that they can begin to launch a targeted spear phishing campaign directly at your organization and your leadership and people within your organization. Or if it has immediate data that has value that they can sell, maybe there's financial data where they can access your bank accounts and begin to exfiltrate money out of your bank accounts. And so implementing hard drive encryption across all of your devices can save you from the headache and vulnerability of these types of scenarios. And we talked a little bit about backups. You want to not only have a backup plan in place and a good, robust, business grade backup that is backing up your files. And, if you have actual servers out there, whether they're in your office or they're in a cloud somewhere, or you're a SaaS or tech company who's got, you've got cloud servers rolled out on AWS or G Cloud or something like that, you want to make sure you have image backups of those servers as well. And then you need to have a validation process. So our clients that we manage, that we manage their IT for, our team is validating their backups on a monthly basis. We are restoring files, restoring server images, making sure that those are functional, that they're working. Because if you don't do that, the thing that generally ends up happening is that somewhere down the road, there is a data loss event that might be because of an infection, a ransomware. It might be, prior to cloud, it might be because of a hard drive failure in a server or something like that, or somebody loses a laptop, and you find out, 9 months down the road, when you try to restore your backups, that the backups have been saying they've been completing along the way, but they've been corrupt, and you're not actually able to restore data for potentially the last 9 months or 12 months or whatever it may be. And so validating your backups on a monthly basis is a very important thing to keep in mind. Couple more questions. Let me see if we can answer those very quick. Andrea says, for very small businesses, 2 to 4 people with limited resources and BYOD, what would be your top 3 things to make sure we put into place? Very good question. A couple of these couple of slides, I think right here, going back one, have some of those answers. 2-factor authentication, very important. Centralized, backed up data repositories. File share is another very important one. And hard drive encryption, I think are really, and then endpoint security, I've got to add, and a 4th one in there. But endpoint security is definitely one of those very important items to make sure that you're not using some free version of, some archaic antivirus out there, but you're using modern next generation endpoint security across all your devices. David Weinstein, Earle, thanks for being such a wonderful Pando founding member, and this topic is so relevant now. Really appreciate the thoughtful conversation. I appreciate that, David. Thanks for stroking my ego a little bit today. So here's some other considerations. That being that that among remote workers this year, one of the things that they seem to be struggling the most with is communication. Aside from loneliness, and those 2 things seem to be tied, but those are the most significant challenges that they're facing this year, is staying in contact and having a cohesive way to collaborate with their team members. Is tied up there with that loneliness factor and not having the social interaction that we're generally accustomed to. As you know, as business leaders, communication and collaboration are foundational to the productivity of your organizations, whether you're in the office or not. If your current communication methods have been just good enough, I would encourage you to begin to think about innovating and evolving those to the next step. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Microsoft Teams. If you are Office 365 users, Microsoft Teams is included with your Office 365 licenses. And it's something that Nexus IT has been using actually for a couple of years, and we've been helping our clients migrate to it and use it for a few different years. You may have noticed at the beginning, if you follow me at all on social media, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were very anti-Zoom. Zoom, as many of you may know, is a Chinese product, and it's kind of fraught with some potential security vulnerabilities because of that. It has evolved and improved significantly over the past 6 months. We will give it that. But Microsoft Teams is an entire suite of collaboration tools. We've found it to be extremely valuable within our organization because it really gives you a ton of different tools that help your team stay connected to each other, that help them collaborate in one space with each other and do so in a very efficient, effective manner. There are few platforms that actually include all of these different features and functionalities in one platform. Generally, you have to use 3 or 4 different platforms to get all of these. And so the fact that within Microsoft Teams, you can have email communications, you can have chat communications, you can do voice calls, video calls, you can do conference calls, just like this Zoom call that we are on. You can do screen sharing, file sharing. You can have your calendars integrated into it. You can do project management and more. If some of you are developers, and you're working with Jira and GitLab, you can plug those into Microsoft Teams. If we had a little more time, I might pull it up and show you a few things, but I'll save you that for now. But you can plug in, for example, modules like Trello, and other different really useful collaborative tools out there into Teams. And so it's something I would recommend. Going back to Kevin's question here about Microsoft. Actually, the question is about OneDrive. I'm going to leave that for a second, Kevin, because we're going to get to that. So three scenarios that you, coming back to this idea of three different scenarios that you may be looking at for your long-term work environments, and likely, with remote work involved. Again, you may be transitioning back to all staff on-premise. You may have a hybrid remote work on-premise environment or an all remote. And so just speaking about the specifics of each one of these, and Andrea, these may provide you with some additional answers to your question. But for these all on-premise situations, you want to be thinking about many of the security measures we've already talked about today, such as two-factor authentication, such as Microsoft 365, VPN if you do have remote access. Productivity tools, or if you're all in the office, are kind of going to be status quo. And then remote access, by all means, you want to consider VPN and two-factor authentication. If you're in a hybrid environment where you're doing some remote, some on-premise, here's some other suggestions for you. This is where, Kevin, that idea of OneDrive comes into play. Microsoft Teams actually directly leverages OneDrive and the Microsoft SharePoint platform for file sharing within the Microsoft Teams collaboration suite. And so OneDrive is by all means a viable option for many organizations. I will give you one piece of maybe precautionary advice, and that is that in our experience, the OneDrive sync tools that you put on laptops or desktops, particularly for remote workers, so that when they're accessing data, they're able to access that data locally on their machines. For example, if they're going to be on an airplane, or they're going to be disconnected, from an internet connection for a while, they can still access that data, and then when they connect to the internet, it will upload their changes to your corporate file repository. We found that that one data sync is honestly unstable. It's buggy, and oftentimes doesn't work very well. And it's why we probably favor Dropbox Business over OneDrive. Now, there's a bit of a caveat there, because again, the Microsoft ecosystem is meant to all work together, and introducing Dropbox introduces another variable where OneDrive already ties into their suite of tools, and so that's a consideration you have to think about. But we found Dropbox to be more robust, more reliable, and their security measures, particularly for distributed workforces and bring your own device environments, they have an enhanced feature set that gives you more controls, more abilities to wipe and erase data or retrieve important data. So those are things to keep in mind. I'm going to skip some of this. I know we've got about 10 minutes left here. When you're thinking about an all remote scenario, which many of you may be in those all remote scenarios right now, when you're taking into consideration your security plans here, you need to be thinking about how you prevent your remote workers and their computers from putting your business data at risk. Think about how you protect your users' personal and private data as well. If they are doing BYOD, you don't want to expose them or their private data to any other potential vulnerabilities either. And we've already talked about this, but how do you prevent potential data theft from rogue employees? And some people might think that this is a far-fetched idea. This is something we see happen here in Utah, and we've seen happen in Park City. I know of businesses specifically in Park City who have had employees leave and steal proprietary data to launch a startup and compete directly with clients of ours. And so you have to be thinking about how you protect that data. Again, think about data loss prevention tools, so that if somebody happens to decide that they're unhappy with you and your organization, they can't steal your data and use that to potentially do something destructive against you or your organization. Let's see. Another consideration here for your remote workforce, and I think honestly, as business leaders in some situations with COVID, we've allowed this pandemic and this scenario to make us a little bit lazy, and we've looked at some opportunities to say, hey, I've got a really great cost savings opportunity on my hand here. I don't have to lease office space anymore. I don't have to buy an internet connection there. I don't have to provide desks and computers and all the tools for my team members. They can just provide all that on their own at home, and we'll give them some tools to access our data and collaborate. And the reality is that mindset, first of all, it is destructive to your culture. You need to be thinking about how that affects your team members, and you need to be thinking about how you continue to have an engaged, cohesive relationship with them, and providing them with effective, productive technology tools is part of that from our perspective. And so think about providing them with those corporate, so we recommend to our clients, have onboarding packages ready to go, depending upon your hiring pace. Have 1, have 10, have 15, just depending upon how often you hire, but have a laptop ready to go, a monitor, have keyboards and mice ready to go, have your phone system and a quality headset ready to go, have those business class firewall routers ready to go, and the endpoint security. And so when you onboard somebody new, and I realize that some of us are hiring during this time, and so and I know, in fact, I know of business leaders who have hired without even doing a video conversation during COVID, which seems absolutely absurd to me, but I do know people who have done that. And I know others, including ourselves, who have hired strictly based upon our video conversations. And so if you're based here in Park City or in Salt Lake, and you're hiring somebody in Ohio, and as part of your onboarding measures, we recommend having this setup ready to go, shipping it out to them, having it pre-configured with all of your administrative controls and your access and your security measures. And that's where you can consult, IT professionals, or if you have internal IT resources, consult them to come up with the proper plans there. One other thing to keep in mind here is that compliance just became insanely more complicated now that we have these distributed workforces. Now that you've gone from 1 or 2, internet connections and firewalls at your offices, and you've gone to now potentially dozens or hundreds or thousands of internet connections with thousands of distributed devices. Thinking about compliance regulations, and the reality is, whether we think we are or not, the majority of our businesses are subject to compliance regulations such as PCI or credit card handling. Those of us that are involved in healthcare space, we're subject to HIPAA. Many of us to GDPR or NIST or other compliance regulations that we have to keep in mind. And the framework of those has just become more complicated. And so you've got to be, as you're putting together these long-term remote work security plans and scenarios, you've got to be thinking about how do we keep our data access compliant per the regulations. And this is where if you don't have the internal IT resources to help with this, looking to an outside IT provider like Nexus IT, who has experience and expertise in compliance, can help you understand what your new variables are, what your new gaps are, and how you can plan for those and address those so that you remain compliant. So part of that process is developing a risk compliant checklist and coming up with action plans. We've got some questions. I'm going to save those right now for the end. We're almost there. So I just want to I just want to kind of mention a couple of last few items, and that is, as business leaders, we need to be thinking about HR and the remote workplace now that we're in these distributed workforces. I realize it's really easy to get disconnected from our team members. It's really easy to get disconnected, as leaders, and for our team members to get disconnected from each other. And so remaining connected is extremely important. Even as I know, as business leaders, oftentimes, while we want to assume the best of our team when they're working remote and you don't hear from them for 3 days, you're probably assuming that they're laying in bed in their pajamas, eating popcorn and watching Netflix, right? And they might be assuming the same of you if you're not staying connected to them. And so I encourage us as leaders to be consistently connected with our team members out there. And this information isn't foreign to any of you. I know we've all heard about it, but a lot of our team members are experiencing significant loneliness, depression, anxiety, additional stresses. Mental health has taken a significant dive throughout COVID. And our teammates are expressing that they are experiencing difficulties communicating and collaborating with each other. So be innovative, sit down with your teams, figure out how you create a more cohesive, collaborative environment and culture for your team, even though you're all sitting in different places throughout the country or the world. And think about your team member motivation. Again, some of these stats I think are slightly old. Some of them I think are slightly slanted. Honestly, I think that a lot of people are looking at the current remote work scenario through rose-colored glasses because there's a lot of conveniences. You don't necessarily have to get up and shower in the morning. You don't have to get up now at 5:30 and shower and get the kids off to school and get breakfast and then do your 45-minute commute to get into the office and look good, to get there. You can just throw on a hat or, sit up in your underwear if you want at your desk. And so there's a lot of conveniences, and I think that a lot of numbers have been slanted that we see in terms of people's level of satisfaction, engagement, and productivity throughout COVID. So be thinking about how you continue to keep your team members motivated, how you implement mechanisms to create accountability and incentive within the organization, and again, how you create that collaborative environment. Here's some, I think we're probably we are out of time.
Yeah. Maybe we could just take a quick look at the questions, maybe answer one more. And then we probably should wrap up.
Yeah. Rob Soares says backup validation can be complicated subject, especially when it comes to databases and other more complicated data sets. What would you recommend as a low friction backup validation tool or methodology? Rob, there are automated tools out there, particularly for these types of scenarios. Honestly, we find it hard to trust automated tools sometimes because we've seen significant gaps in accuracy in those automated tools. That being said, there are, let's say, for example, like our local backup company, StorageCraft. They actually have some really effective automated backup validation tools. So if you have images of your servers, images of your database servers, you can schedule automated test restores of those, and then it will spin up databases and can report back to you. Those things you can generally trust, but we recommend that you have some mechanism, some level of manual validation as well. With databases, depending upon the type of database, your backup scenarios are going to be different. Generally, though, that's going to involve some sort of offline image of the backup and then offline image of the server, and then restoring and validating those. That's probably, I know there's more Q&A. I will try to reach out to some of you that have Q&A here that I didn't get to. I hope that this has been fun and valuable for all of you. It has been for me, and again, I appreciate you all joining me here today.
Earle, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your time. That was incredibly informative. I certainly learned a lot. I captured the other questions, so I can come back to you with those, and maybe we could just get back to those people by email. But if you'd also, if you're willing to share your slides, I'm sure the people that were on this call would love to have a record of those so they can start to make a plan. In many cases, we haven't told them that. So thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who came today to participate. We really appreciate the participation.
Yeah,
Good
more than willing.
Earle, happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.